I talk to people who are experts and consultants all the time, and they're wondering about whether they should start a podcast or do some other type of online content. And so there's a lot of questions because a lot of complexities in setting that up. And so one of the things that I do is I coach people on setting up this type of content. I coach them around which types of social media to use, how to set it up, how I do it myself, because I've been doing this for years now. And, how do you grow an audience? Should you be on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok? What type of content should you be doing on there? How do you outsource? What should you call your podcast? What format should it be? All of these are questions, and they differ from person to person and business to business. So I'm very lucky that one of my coaching clients, Judson Rollins, agreed to let me record and share an actual live coaching session that I did with him. And so that's what this video is. So it's fairly long. It's an episode of the Recognized Authority podcast. And if you look in the show notes, you can find the rest of that podcast if you want to find more. And so this is a podcast episode, and it is a real coaching call with a real client of mine. So I hope you get something from this. And I've put in the YouTube channel comments, I have put, sorry, not in the comments, in the description, I've put a timestamp of all the different sections so you can jump to the things that are most relevant for you. So stay tuned. I hope you enjoy the video.
Welcome to The Recognized Authority, a podcast that helps specialized consultants and domain experts on your journey to become known as an authority in your field. Here is your host, Alastair McDermott.
Okay, so Judson, thank you for coming on, and we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to do a live coaching session about content strategy. So thanks for being the guinea pig.
Hey, thanks, Alastair. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so because we're doing this slightly different, I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourself to the listener, and can you tell them a little bit about what you do and what your business is about?
Sure. I'm Judson Rollins. I'm the founder of Propel Revenue, which is a transportation pricing consultancy. I'm probably best described as a recovered airline consultant. I was working with airlines and aircraft manufacturers until COVID-19 hit. Unfortunately, a lot of that business was wiped out, and so I pivoted into working with transport companies, especially cargo carriers, air, sea, road, and rail, on their pricing and demand segmentation practices. And so basically, my mission is to help cargo companies identify their customers, know what their demand is relative to capacity, and instead of setting their pricing according to cost or competition, to set their pricing according to demand versus capacity and according to each customer's individual willingness to pay.
Awesome. And I love the way that rolled off your tongue so easy.
So I've gotten to say it a few times lately.
Yeah, no, really, really cool. Okay, so let's have a chat about content strategy, because that's kind of the stage you're at, is to start planning what you're going to be doing in terms of your content output. I think your positioning is very good. It's really tight, and you've clearly identified a problem. I think from what you've said to me so far, in previous calls, that the content is what you're working on next, right?
That's right.
Okay, so let's see where to start. Can you just give me a little bit about what's in your head at the moment about creating your content? What are you thinking about?
Sure. I think according to the conversations we've had so far, or in line with those conversations, I really want to focus on just having a couple of channels and really maximizing the value of those channels. And for me, that's going to be written word through a blog on my website and through LinkedIn. And then that's going to be audio video content, primarily through YouTube, but also through a podcast that I'm planning to launch later this year.
Okay, so that makes sense. Yeah, so in terms of pillars, I see three big pillars in terms of key things that you should be doing as an authority. One is writing, second one is speaking, and the third one is research. And we can talk about where that might come in a little bit. And then in terms of actual channels, one thing that I'm seeing working really well for a lot of people is having a podcast and then having a book as well at some point. And quite often that book is coming later. It depends on how far down the journey to authority they are. So those are kind of the key things. And then in terms of social channels, LinkedIn, for most of the people that I'm talking to, is the primary channel. And then they have like a secondary social channel sometimes, like YouTube or Instagram or Twitter. but they're focusing they're focusing most of that content effort on LinkedIn in terms of social distribution. So is that's kind of what you were thinking of?
Not so much Facebook and Instagram, but the rest of the channels, yes. Facebook and Instagram, I think to my mind, I associate those with more B2C brands, and mine is more of a B2B brand. And Instagram in particular is really geared toward visual imagery, and that's something that's really not a talent area for me. It's not an area of strength, but I think maybe if I get to the point where I start having more graphically oriented marketing materials, maybe I introduce Instagram at a later date.
Yeah. Now, one thing about Instagram, I will say, is that there are some companies doing kind of text-based content really well on there. One example of the kind of the text-focused Instagram accounts is that they have a lot of carousels, which are these multi-page documents. And where I found that useful is because I want to make carousels for LinkedIn anyway, because I found that they work quite well on LinkedIn, and they make for a nice kind of packaged up document. You can create those quite quickly on something like Canva if you have a style guide creating something like that, but also you can then dual purpose them from LinkedIn also over to Instagram. So the future is Christo's brand, and they have some really great carousels on there. So just it's an example of an Instagram account that's heavily text based, but it's really nicely designed as well. So that's just one example of that Instagram. Now I know that's not your primary, so but I just wanted to kind of draw attention to that. There is an option there if you do want to go down the Instagram route.
Oh, that sounds great. And Alastair, let me just maybe ask you a question for a second. Is that something that you do personally, or is that something you do through your virtual assistant or a larger team? How do you produce that content?
Okay, so what I had my designer. So I have a designer who works 2 or 3 days a week for me, depending on the week and the amount of work that we have. And so I have her create. So first of all, she did the rebrand, and that was how I found her. I had her work on the rebrand that I did last year from marketing for consultants over to the recognized authority. And so I wanted somebody who could help me with that rebrand and create a style guide for me. And I wanted that style guide because I then used the style guide with all of the content that I create and anybody else creates for me. I give them the style guide, and the style guide really is 2 key pieces of information. One is the font that we use. So what's the font that we use across all of the like the website, all of the graphics and everything. It's very consistent. And then the second thing is the colors scheme. And so there's a color scheme or brand colors. And so usually we'll have 3 colors. We'll usually have a primary, secondary, and a tertiary. And that's kind of so you'll notice if you look at my LinkedIn channel, if you look at Instagram, if you look at YouTube, there's this consistency all across all of those. In fact, you'll even see it if you get a spreadsheet or something for me. I always use those same colors and fonts as well. It just keeps everything on brand. It keeps it looking really coherent, congruent. So I think that's really important. So if nothing else, I would create a style guide for myself. If that's what I would recommend that you do. If you don't have somebody to work with on that. And it's about picking, consistent color scheme. And I think you've already got a good color scheme, and then a good font that you can use. And you want a font that's nice and clean and readable. Some brands have two fonts, some brands have 1 font. It's up to you. I wouldn't go more than 2 fonts. It gets to start to look too disorganized. You don't want to look like a flyer that's on the wall of a supermarket. You don't want to look like that. Something somebody threw together in Microsoft Word art. You want it, and that's why we kind of limit the number of fonts and colors, because then everything starts to have this kind of consistency. So does that answer the question?
I think it does, yeah. Maybe a different way of putting it, drawing on my airline background, is if it looks like something you'd see on board Ryanair or Spirit Airlines, it probably isn't good for your brand.
All right, I'm not going to touch that one. Very good, very good. All right, so let's just circle back and see what we're talking about here. So we're talking about the design of the content that you're going to be putting out. We're talking about the channels that you're putting it on. Let's talk a little bit about the actual content. So you talked about starting a podcast. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So the idea with the podcast is it serves two purposes. One, it's an opportunity for me to certainly demonstrate my expertise, both through solo podcasts as well as being able to ask intelligent questions of thought leaders in the cargo industry. But it's also an opportunity for me to network, not just with the podcast guests, but with their contacts as well. And so there is an opportunity to kind of climb the ladder, so to speak, in terms of getting access to better podcast guests and getting access to better and more prominent potential clients. And so what I'm thinking right now is looking at about a 65-35 mix of guest episodes and solo episodes. So that's enough to keep the audience interested. They're not just hearing my voice week after week, but it also gives me a chance to do long-form solo content where it's justified.
Yeah, 100%. And so you've already preempted some of my questions there. The overall goal, and the podcast can have a number of goals here, but the overall goal, typically it's something like growing an audience, maybe growing an email list, building trust, building relationships directly with people. And some people go down the revenue route with sponsorship, and I think that you're not going to go down that route, from what you've told me. And,
that's correct. Yeah.
And then, growing that audience and email list into clients and building trust with those listeners and with those relationships with those guests. So I like the mix. If you were, there's a couple of different ways you can go about this, about podcasting for authority. One of those is to have a purely solo show. And what that does is that gives you this entirely kind of authority building show. The problem with that is distribution. There's no network effect that's built into that. Another option is to do what I've done with Recognized Authority, which is to have an interview-based show, and there is a network effect built in because every guest will in theory share it. Now, not in reality they don't, but a lot of them will, and so you gain access to new audiences that way. And then you can have a mix of those, which I think is a really good option. That's what you're talking about here. And then one other option is with the solo shows is to actually create a solo show as a complementary show. And that's something that I've done, and I talked with Jonathan Bailey Strong on the podcast about recently, which is to have a solo show that's kind of standalone as an evergreen audio training course. And it's just out there all of the time, working for you 24/7, building your authority. And so people can just turn up and listen to that. And you can, so if you have the framework for some sort of training course, you could actually deliver through a podcast like that. And what I like about that is it's getting you onto another platform, podcasting platform, and having something out there for you all the time. Seth Godin did this as one of the ones we mentioned on the show with Jonathan. Seth Godin did this, I think, about 8 years ago. And his podcast is still up and running and driving leads to his, to his training courses and things. So that's an option as well. So you're talking about going the hybrid option. One of the things about the interview show is who you actually choose as guests. And the interesting thing about this is you can choose to interview potential clients, and that can be really interesting. And then you can also interview authority figures in your space. So what's your thinking on who you're actually going to get as guests?
Sure. I think where I'm looking to go is start with commercial leaders, people who are already working in my particular niche at target company, target prospects who are on my radar, people who are working on pricing, working on demand segmentation, knowing the customer, and putting together the service offerings. Certainly, I'd be looking to target top-tier firms in air cargo and sea cargo, say Atlas Air or Maersk on the sea side. And looking for the people who are the movers and thinkers and influencers in my particular niche.
Yeah, I like it. And so are any of those potential clients for you?
Yes, certainly. All of them are. They are people I'd love to talk to, both in terms of networking and in terms of future business, both.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, there's no stronger, as far as I can see, there's no stronger LinkedIn connection request than, hey, I was really interested in what you said there. Would you like to come on my podcast and talk about it more? And it's just such a powerful way to connect with people. It doesn't come across, you're not asking them for something, you're giving them something, you're giving them a platform. So I find that works really well. So I think that's really strong. Do you have any plan for growing the podcast listenership?
That's something that I really kind of need to think about. I've been really more focused on who do I want and what topics do I want to cover. But growth planning is something that I need to start thinking about.
Yeah. So we can talk about the topics in a minute. So one of the best ways to grow your podcast is to get on other podcasts. So can you... So do you know anybody else who's podcasting in this space, podcasting to those same people or to similar people in your industry, in your niche?
Sure.
And can you do you have any podcasts there that you're already listening to, maybe that you might make for a good guest for?
Yeah, I think one that's really high on my priority list is called The Lodestar, and that is a UK-based podcast that focuses on what's happening in the transport and supply chain worlds, both from an operator/carrier perspective and from a customer perspective. What's the latest and greatest? What's next? What do shippers need to worry about? And certainly they've had plenty of grist for their mill the past couple of years with all the chaos that's been going on in the shipping and supply chain worlds.
Oh yeah, for sure. So okay, that's a great way to get on to other people's podcasts. Is well, first of all, you can just go and pitch them, and the second way is to actually invite the podcaster to come on yours. You invite them to come on your podcast and talk about the issues that are facing them and what they see in the industry, and quite often they will invite you back. That's just because you're building a relationship, and you're not doing it in a kind of a sleazy way. You're doing it in a genuine way, and that works really well. So I would specifically target podcasters as well who have a podcast targeting your industry and people you'd like to reach, and then the key part of that is when you go on those podcasts is to have a call to action to listen to your podcast. Because when people are listening to podcasts, quite often they're doing something where they probably don't have their hands free. It's not going to be easy for them, like they're doing the dishes or they're driving a car or they're at the gym. And so asking them to take some action where they go to visit your website, I find that it's a better call to action to ask them to go check out your podcast and have a very easy, memorable podcast, because they do have their podcast app open and they know how to find new podcasts in there. And so it makes for a much softer launch. Then put your other calls to action in your own podcast. So your goal on other people's podcasts is to get them to come and listen to your podcast.
Yeah. And something that I like is when people are listening to your podcast, you've got kind of the opportunity. I can't remember whether you've had this in some of your previous episodes. I don't think you've always had it, but to have kind of a 30-second commercial break, so to speak, or advert break, in which you do plug your own services. It's something that Michael Sapersky does with Consulting Success, and does it really brilliantly, because he keeps it down to about a 15-second spot. It's just one. It's in the middle of the episode. It's not obnoxious. It doesn't feel over the top, but it gives you a strong reminder of, oh yeah, this podcast is with a purpose, and there might be an opportunity for this person to add value.
Yeah, and so I like what he does with Consulting Success like that, and I've actually paused and listened to that actual advertisement for his or pitch for his training. I've listened to that quite a few times to hear how he actually describes it. At the moment, I have a call to action at the start and end of episodes. And so we can talk a little bit actually about the format of the podcast if you want. What I like for an interview show is I like to take a clip of the guest speaking. And so to take a 10 to 20 second quote from the guest speaking, and then take that and put that at the start as a cold open. So to kind of open a loop to show something, hey, this is a kind of a taster of what you're going to get in the episode. And then after that, I have I think it's 15-second intro, which has some music and which is a voiceover. And so what that will do is that will give the listener a kind of a taster of what it's about. And then at the end of that, and that's not me speaking with the voiceover, that's a voiceover artist that I hired to do that part. And then what I do is go into my call to action, which is usually, I think, about 30 seconds. And
Sure.
then I'll go into the intro. So that's the format. And then like Michael has his he has a mid-roll ad break, and then I don't do that currently. I wait to the end of the interview and then do a call to action at the end.
Yeah.
And I have pre-recorded I think 6 different calls to action, and 6 for the start and 6 for the end. And I tell the editor which one I want him to put in. So I'll say, hey, use this CTA at the start, this one at the end. One of them promotes my free ebook. One of them promotes the other podcast. One of them is to rate and review the podcast, and one of them is about group coaching that I'm starting soon. So all of those are, they're kind of dependent on the context of the time and everything. But I just want to try and rotate through those as well. So what you can do is you can record those, and that's a kind of taking a very produced approach to it, which ultimately requires editing. And so the next question then is, are you going to hire an editor or a service, which is an option, or the other option is to not use an editor or a service, and which is to record it all live to tape. And that's harder to do, particularly if you're starting out. But it is possible, and what you can do then is you can just live stream the whole interview. And if you do it that way, it's usually not as well produced, but it's live. And so, there's a bit of give, from the audience, because they know it was recorded live. So that's an option as well. So what do you think of that?
At this stage, what I'm thinking is to have a service help me with the first few. In fact, I just had a call with somebody in Chicago yesterday who seemed to offer a pretty promising service. I think I would rather have it doesn't need to be completely polished, but it needs to be a somewhat polished product, I think, just to make it more listenable for the audience. Maybe at a later stage, once I get more used to the format and I'm more comfortable, I might transition to self-produced. But frankly, there's just so much else to do with the business as a solo consultant that I don't want to get into audio video production. It's just not the best use of my time.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Now I'm a bit strange. I like to do things before I outsource them, so I edited first to figure out how it should be done, and then I outsourced it. I've always liked learning how to do something so that when I outsource it, I know what the person is doing for me. I agree that may not be the best use of time, but I think it's the engineer in me that likes to do that. So maybe do as I say, not do as I do.
Well, I imagine your staff really appreciate having pretty well written SOPs, because you've been there and done that.
Yeah, I think so. I think it is easier, and because I know the problems they're facing, so I think hopefully that helps. And it's a bit like, to use a kind of a marine example, it's a bit like a captain of a ship who's actually been at all of the different stations, and so they know how all of those work. So when they're asking somebody to do something, it's not something that they haven't done themselves before. Yep,
it's a great path to leadership.
Okay.
Alastair, before we move on, let me just ask you another question. I mean, you've talked a little bit about having voiceover talent. You've talked about having a graphic designer. How are you finding these people? Are you finding them through Upwork or Fiverr, or are these personal relationships? Are they local? Are they within region? Are they global?
Yeah, so kind of all of the above. So first off, I've been outsourcing online since 2007, so I'm quite used to doing that. I started off using a company that was Upwork before they were Upwork. There's a big consolidation in that space. I've been using, so Upwork and freelancer.com are kind of the two major players there. And I've been using both of those since 2007. And so I find people on there. And also, I've had people outreach to me sometimes, and most times I'll ignore outreach, but every so often, when somebody does get in touch, I'll check them out. And that was how I found my podcast editor. And I found another podcast producer on Reddit. I found my current VA because my previous VA was leaving, and she said, "Hey, there's somebody who I've been working with." I had found her through another outsourcing service, which I don't recommend, not because the quality of the people are great there, but because I think they don't the service doesn't treat people very well, and so I don't want to promote them. And then there's another service, there's a couple of country specific services. So for example, two of the people I work with are from the Philippines, and so there are services that will help you to hire people directly from those places. And I think part of the reason why it's very popular to work with them is, well, in part because the cost of living is cheaper there, but also because a major part of their economy is what they call BPO, or business process outsourcing. So there's a lot of people available, and they have pretty good English. So I think it's a second language for most of them, but they speak it very, very well. So so you can get people. So really, it's a question of getting used to hiring people online, and then finding people you can build relationships with and trust. One of the things I'd say is important is to have some kind of contract with them, and this was something that I didn't do back at the start. You can listen to my episode with Aaron about IP and legal. I'll find out what that is in a second. But I didn't have an agreement in place that I would own the copyright for something that I got somebody to build for me, and the client asked for the copyright and I couldn't assign it to them, and the provider, the subcontractor, asked me for a lot of money, and so I was stuck. I couldn't give them copyright, so that was a bad place to be, because it was something I wanted to do, and so that was a good lesson for me. Hey, have an agreement in place with every subcontractor, so it's you're working on a work for hire basis. Yeah, so episode 16 is with Aaron Austin, and how to leverage your expertise with intellectual property. If you want to learn more about that, I was talking about it on that episode. So, yeah, and so I paid, I think, about $1,000 to a lawyer for, or the equivalent here in euros, to get a template subcontractor agreement that covered all of these things and would work for an international subcontractor. So, yeah. So that's how we covered that part. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, but quite thoroughly. Thank you.
So, okay, so where were we?
Well, I think we were talking about the podcast. We've talked a little bit about written word. I think something else we wanted to cover off was video.
Yeah. Okay, so with video, there's a few things that are important. So first off, I shared with you before we got on here, I shared with you the free book that I have on video and microphone, video and audio hardware, how to look good, sound good. One of the things that we were discussing was a tip that I got from Nina Friorp, which, and I have a whole podcast interview with her that would be worth listening to, about looking better on video and audio, and it's really important for anybody building their authority. I interviewed Professor Norbert Schwartz on the podcast as well, because he did a study which showed that you come across as more likable, as smarter, and your work is more important if you've got better audio and video. And I mean, like, that's crucial to what we're doing. So I think that's really, really important to do that. So, yeah, so audio, video, and I will share that that book with you, the ebook link, and I'll put it in the show notes for this episode as well. But it's just about, looking better on camera, and one of the things is what I'm doing right now is I'm looking directly at the camera, and that's really important to do as well, to make eye contact with the viewer, and the viewer will feel that you're talking directly to them as well. It's really important to do that. If you're on a call like this one, every so often I need to look down and make sure that you're still with me, and I'm looking at you out of my peripheral vision, but to try and make eye contact as much as possible by looking at the camera. And with YouTube, it's really even more important to do that. So with pre-recorded video. So you got to be looking at the camera 100% of the time. So, or 95% of the time.
Okay.
So what else? Some other simple things on camera. Have yourself framed so that the top of your head is near the top of the frame. You don't want to be like way down in the frame. And so crop it or find a way to do it. Yeah, because you look like you're falling off the screen. It makes you look small, diminutive, and not authoritative, basically. It just looks a bit silly as well. So you want to do that. You want to have a decent background. You've got a nice background there with your bookshelf. Bookshelf is a perfectly good background. I've seen people using screens like a folding screen and things like that. That's absolutely fine as well. I like to have I put a bit of work into my background because I was going to be doing a lot of videos. Let's see what else. Yeah, for video, the audio quality is more important than the picture quality, particularly when you're talking to camera. It's just it's what's going to it's what people are going to judge on first. and then try and bring a bit of personality into it as well, particularly if it's a solo video. So, try and make it kind of embrace your personality a little bit. Don't make it boring. So,
Alastair, what are your thoughts on dynamic backgrounds? Like, for instance, because I'm working in the transport space, I was thinking about going out and shooting some of my videos at train stations and container yards and other places that are operationally critical for my potential clients. Does that add anything, or is that just adding visual clutter that really distracts from the message?
Well, it depends on the way that you use it, and I'd probably need to talk to a video editor to know more about this. There are certainly places for B-roll, which is where you have related video that you can play over the audio of somebody talking in order to break up the monotony of just the talking head. And I think that can be really useful. I wouldn't put a huge amount of time or money into it. I think it's nice to have, but probably not critical where you are right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. Yeah, the reason I'm thinking about it is, being based in Amsterdam, I've got a lot of options here. We've got a really thriving rail hub here. We've got a huge seaport just down the road in Rotterdam, or just down the tracks in Rotterdam, as it were, and also a significant airport here at Schiphol. So it really offers a lot of possibilities for me to go out and shoot live shots if I want to.
Yeah, I think that kind of stuff doesn't hurt at all, and I think that's where maybe some of your other channels, like doing video for social media, and shooting some live videos, and again, if going back to say Instagram or I think LinkedIn have gotten rid of stories. I think they had stories for a while, but they got rid of them. But that would particularly suit the story style, which are these videos that stay live for a day or two. So yeah, that could be interesting for those, but I would worry about the amount of time that you would spend doing that compared to if you spent that same amount of time like pitching podcast guests or that kind of activity.
And also, I think I'm a little bit put off by the idea of the story that expires in 24 hours. I want to be producing things that are more evergreen. I'm not in the breaking news business, so things that only last 24 hours don't really make a lot of sense for me.
Yeah, the only issue with that is it's what the channels are promoting. So where they're useful is if you've got an audience is sharing what you're working on right now and things like that can be useful for that. Particularly the kind of the behind the scenes. That behind the scenes content works really well on some of the social media channels. So that's where I think that would come in.
And since we're talking about video, let me ask you your thoughts on TikTok. I know that's been a great subject of conversation.
Okay, so I have heard that of people getting incredible numbers, like 50,000 views of a video in a day on B2B content, on a relatively new TikTok channel. So the numbers sound incredible, but I'm still pretty skeptical. I don't understand TikTok. I don't use it, and I personally like to work on channels where I'm a native, where I know the channel, and so I'm quite comfortable on LinkedIn, and I'm quite comfortable on Twitter, and less so Instagram and Facebook. I don't spend much time at all on Facebook, and haven't for years, and so I don't really like going in there, and I don't create content for in there very often. So I think in part it's like where are you used to spending your time, and what are you good at doing, and what do you like doing? Like do you have the app installed on your phone, things like that, So, but it particularly as a solo, even as a solo person or somebody with a couple of subcontractors working part time, I would still be wary about spending time outside of the core platforms and core activities, because there are so many distractions. And, if somebody has a full marketing department to work on creating content, and, if you've got a full team for that, great, you can be everywhere. But I think you've got to be really careful not to waste time, because it's the only asset that we can't recreate, So, so we've got to use our time wisely. So that's what I'd say about that.
Absolutely. And as I love to tell people, as a solo consultant, I'm the CEO, the chief everything officer. So there's always other things to work on. And going down for instance, TikTok rabbit hole isn't really something I can afford to do unless I can clearly see where the ROI is going to be.
Yeah, exactly. So if we just take a step back for a minute, so we were talking about writing, speaking, research. One thing I think the podcast can be really useful for is in terms of research, because when I think of research, I'm thinking about small scale research. And so I did a study where I surveyed over 1,000 consultants, and it was really useful. I got a huge amount of data from it, and in fact, I got enough content ideas probably to satisfy social media for the rest of my life if I wanted to. There's also, the guts of 1, 2, 3 books in there as well. What was really interesting was that a guy called Tom Miller did a similar survey of the same audience, and he didn't survey in the same way that I did. He had telephone interviews with, I think, 43 or 47 consultants, and he went in depth with each of them. And whereas I did this kind of more broad survey where I was asking shorter questions and different ones each time to a different segment. What was really interesting was I got in a call with Tom, and we kind of compared notes, and both of us came to identical conclusions from the different methods. And so, first of all, it was really nice to have kind of independent validation of my conclusions. But the other thing that was really interesting to me was the way that he had approached it is actually what you do on a podcast, because you get in a call with somebody and you talk to them for 25, 30 minutes about their area of expertise. And so you can actually use the podcast as a way to do small scale research as well. And where this gets really interesting then is you then end up with the material for your book. So this is all about being clever about how you use your time and repurposing what you're doing. And so I think that's where your podcast, your small scale research, your book all tie in together. So I think that could be useful for you if you approach your podcast from that perspective of, if I was to survey the audience about something, what would I survey them about? And just ask those questions,
Yeah, that makes sense.
So a couple other things about the podcast. The workflow is really important. So having a repeatable SOP checklist, having a list of all of your guests that you intend to have somewhere. I have a crazy master spreadsheet for my podcast that has everything in there, from creating show notes and pulling out guest quotes to listing all the topics to I even count the number of minutes of runtime of episodes and create a running average of that, so I know it's approximately right all the time. And I even put down the gender of the guest, because I want to try and keep an approximate 50-50 gender as well. So things like that, and that's all in the spreadsheet, in one spreadsheet for me to keep track of. And then the workflow and having the workflow laid out so that you know what the workflow is and who's doing each part of it. I think that's really important as well. And then once you've got the audio file ready to go, having your processes set up to actually distribute it. So it goes live on the podcast host. Do you have a page on your website? When that goes live, do you send that to the guest? Do you email that to the guest? Do you have some sort of promotional graphic to go with that? All of those types of things.
Yeah, it's really important, and that's something that I know I need to start learning. And that kind of actually leads to a question I have for you, which is this just your SOP? Is that something you kind of developed through trial and error along the way? Did you have someone else's template? Had you done research online? How did you find the material for the SOPs that you use today?
I think a lot of it grew organically. Now, one big advantage that I've had in podcasting, well, maybe it's an advantage, maybe not. So first of all, I've been listening to podcasts since about 2004. And secondly, I have been planning this particular podcast for about 6 years. And that's so bad. But actually, the reason why I didn't launch it earlier was because I needed to niche down the business. And so it was actually an indicator to me that there was a problem with my positioning. And that was the reason. But I had put a lot of work into podcast planning back then, because so I had gone through a lot of those issues in my head. And so I had a lot of notes and things. But it's certainly something I can help you with as well, is to share some of my podcasting SOPs and things like that with you.
That'd be great. Yep.
Okay, so Let me see. Is there anything else on the podcasting side of things you want to ask about?
No, I think we've covered everything that we need to do. We've talked about podcasting. We've talked about videos. We've talked about written content. Yeah, that's really all the media that I can think of.
Okay, just one other thing on video. First off, if you're doing YouTube, it's different than if you're doing social media videos. So if you're doing social media videos, what I would say is make them between 60 seconds and 5 minutes long. Batch record them if you can. Just do them straight to camera. And don't if you make a mistake in it, don't bother trying to edit it out. Just cancel a recording and re-record. It's much quicker usually, and the end result will be better. It's usually much quicker than editing. And so record 5 of those in a session, or 10 of those in a session, maybe once every 2 weeks. And so plan out your topics beforehand and just do a batch record. And that will give you material to put out if you want to do it that way. If you were doing YouTube, things are a little bit different. So the way YouTube is going right now, I think that story is really important. So having like a story arc in your video. So having a first act, second act, third act, having some sort of tension, and also having some sort of hook at the start. I think all of that is really important. And then the other thing about video, and I'm going to have a guy on at some point to talk about YouTube, but one thing I've noticed is YouTube channels, it's more about designing your channel than the individual videos. So that what you want to do is you want to create a binge-worthy channel. So you want your YouTube videos so that each one is a kind of a segue to the next one, and so you want somebody to go in and binge on all of your videos. So you're approaching the whole thing from that perspective, and that's why I mentioned at the very start. That's why I mentioned if you're putting your podcasts up on YouTube, then I think you're better off having them on a secondary channel, because the people who watch the shorter video clips are not the same people who are going to watch the longer videos. And when YouTube suggests it to them as something to watch, they're going to start watching and they're going to go, hey, this isn't for me. And that's going to kill your stats with the other people. So keep the short videos together and keep the longer videos together. That's kind of the approach. And so I was planning to do a lot of work on YouTube. I've put it on the back burner because what I want to do is I want to make them more tightly edited and more edutainment. So bringing the entertainment part into it as well, and to make them into kind of more into like almost like a small mini documentary. So that's kind of my plan with that. So and so I've put that on the back burner a bit because of that. I do love the idea of being on YouTube and having stuff up there, but I think you have to put a bit more work into the videos, because everybody is, people are putting serious money into videos now. Video, I've seen people talking about, episode video production investment for some channels is $50,000, $100,000 per video. For some, it's even more than that. So
but a question that I would have to ask there is, is there really a distinguishable difference in terms of the listenability, watchability, and the quality of the information that's being delivered? Or is it just a lot of, as we say in America, razzle and dazzle?
You see, that's the thing. I think if you write it off as razzle and dazzle, I think that's doing a disservice, because it's probably more than that. Like it's well scripted, but it's scripted in a way by somebody who understands copywriting, who understands plot arcs, who understands tension and entertainment. And so it may be, if you have a brilliantly informative but utterly boring video, I think you're just not going to capture people. And so you've got to try and mix those two things up,
Yeah, but I think that's really more, what you say it, how you deliver it, rather than having a 5 or 6 digit special effects team in the background.
Yeah, it's not just about the special effects. No, it's about more than that. But, I think that, this comes back to a core topic for me, which is that as somebody who wants to build your authority, and for me too, we have to learn how to use these channels. We have to learn how to use the audio video equipment. We were talking about this beforehand. We have to learn how to turn up on video. virtually, because we're going to be doing so many virtual events. That's the future. We're going to be doing a lot of virtual events. Even if we still do in-person events, we will forevermore be doing virtual events as well. And so we need to learn how to do these things. We need to learn how these channels work. We need to learn how to hook somebody's attention. Everybody who is, for example, on TED speakers, they're all trained by TED in how to give a really great speech, and that kind of skill, that's something that we need to upskill on as well. And so I think that's a process that you go through, and a bit like in the old school TV career progression, where somebody starts out in an affiliate station in the middle of nowhere, and then they get promoted into a secondary channel, and then they get promoted up onto the primary shows, in the big cities. It's kind of like that. That's also what we're going through. I'm at the moment, I'm appearing and guesting on some smaller podcasts as a guest. I'm sure that at some point, if I keep doing this and I keep following this same process, I'm sure at some point I'll be interviewed on one of the larger shows, and that's just going to be a natural progression, I hope, touch wood. But that's and you have to have done those smaller shows in order to get to the bigger show. In fact, you don't want to get invited directly onto the big show, because you're going to embarrass yourself. You won't be ready for it. You won't have your call to action down pat. You won't have your website ready, because you will learn over time. So I think there is an incremental thing here that's really important as well. And that only comes from writing and speaking for, years.
You really have to hone your craft. It's important.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me see. So we talked about podcasting, book, LinkedIn. So in terms of the actual content, how are you set for having the content ideas for LinkedIn, or social? Do you know what you want to put out?
Yes, definitely. I actually have an Evernote file that's currently about 120 lines long, with topics that I want to cover. A lot of it's for written form, but it's things that I also can repurpose into audio content, solo podcasts, interview subjects, etc.
Brilliant.
And the ideas just come to you in the most random places. I was watching episodes of one of my favorite. It's kind of a comedy drama show called House of Lies, and it's a show with Don Cheadle and Kristen Bell, and it's about management consultants, and it became the inspiration for a series that I want to do called, and this is not the most family friendly title, Why You Effing Hate Consultants. And I want to talk about the things that clients really hate about consultants and why I'm different. Value-based fees, money-back guarantee, offering things that are actually based on research, not just PowerPoints made up on the fly, and really touching on the things, the kind of the pain points that consulting clients have had in the past, and why can Propel Revenue differentiate itself from the competition. And it's amazing. You're watching this fictional TV series, and you're like, oh, that's actually a real-life idea that might work. And so I'm constantly looking for new ideas. Or, one of the periodicals that I read pretty often is called the Journal of Commerce, which is really the Wall Street Journal of the supply chain world. And I'm constantly seeing articles on new trends, things that are happening. I'm going, wait a second, that story, sure, it's today's story, and the actual headline will be irrelevant by tomorrow, but it demonstrates a concept that I could write evergreen content about in terms of, this is why this shipping carrier is taking too much of a risk-averse approach to its pricing. I was reading last week about a multi-purpose vessel carrier that's already booked out through the middle of next year. And it's like, at what pricing? You don't know where the world is going to be. You don't know what fuel is going to cost. You have no idea what demand's going to look like, which is the most important factor. And you're already sold out more than 12 months out. What's going on here? And so I've got an opportunity to say, are you really sure? And I don't necessarily, the story that I'm writing doesn't become irrelevant when this carrier's decision is no longer relevant.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I like the fact that your content is kind of evergreen like that. And also, some of that sounds a little bit provocative. Some of that sounds like it's a little bit contrarian. And, I just had Alan Weiss on, and he likes to be a bit contrarian. So having that, it certainly can attract attention. Not always 100% good attention, but it certainly can attract attention. So you got to tread a line there and do what feels natural for you with that. But I can see some options for you to talk about why being sold out might be a bad thing, you know?
Yep. In fact, Alan Weiss talks about this, but also the founders of Bootcamp, also the software company, have talked about pick a fight. Find an enemy and pick a fight. You know, you don't want to do it in a way that's completely obnoxious. You don't want to do it in a way that's toxic, but you need to have that ability to take a strong stance and say, no, this is a suboptimal way of doing business, and here's why, without making it personal.
Yeah, and so you're kind of touching on a topic that runs through everything, which is to develop a point of view and have that point of view. And that will then come across in your content. And I think what you're talking about there is just that, having somebody you're picking a fight with, maybe not a person, but maybe a concept, Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, for instance, if I'm writing "Why You Effing Hate Consultants," I'm not going to be calling out competitors by name. That's bad form. I could, but I'm not going to. That's just it really doesn't add to the message. The message is, here's why consultants as a stereotype or as a group are kind of painful to deal with, and here's why you won't experience that pain if you deal with me. And I don't have to call out a competitor by name in order to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. Okay, that sounds good. So, is there anything else you want to ask me about content strategy? Anything else we should cover?
What are your thoughts on newsletters? It's interesting. You see people on LinkedIn talking about, literally within the last 7 days, I've seen one person write a brilliant column on why newsletters are dead, and then another person writing a column on why LinkedIn newsletters are a mainstay of your marketing strategy and you have to have them.
Yeah. So first off, I think if anybody writes why X is dead, they're wrong, because usually that's not the case at all, and no matter what X is. Okay, so I don't like email newsletters, and I love email lists. So for me, it's the terminology there. The idea of a newsletter being a periodical letter that you send to your clients or to people on your list about news related to your company. That's kind of what the original idea of a newsletter was. Now, I know that, that might be taking a very tight definition, a very narrow definition. Broadly speaking, the concept of having an email list where people opt in to hear from you, I think that is brilliant, and I think it's really important to do that so that you are not totally tied into any of the social media channels, so you're not building on rented ground. So, I mean, it's okay to have a presence on those rented ground, but you do want to bring people back into your ecosystem. That's where podcasts and emails are really great, because with the podcast it's less so, because they're opted in to subscribe to the RSS feed, but with email you actually have their email address, so you can always contact them. And so I think that's a really important thing to do. But I would just approach it slightly differently from the newsletter idea. So the newsletter thing, like opt into our free email newsletter, it doesn't sound like a very compelling offer. If you can turn that around and say, here's something that can help you with the problem that you're facing right now, and offered that to them for free as an incentive, then that's much more compelling to me. So is there something that you can offer them that is a compelling offer of some kind? And it's quite often called a lead magnet, which it's an okay term. It's not the best, it's not the worst. A lot of these marketing terms are so, like the term funnel, it's not great technically, but it's not the worst either. But yeah, so lead magnet, I like that idea of having something like that.
Love it. Fantastic. Yeah, I think we've done a pretty thorough job covering all the various media that a solo consultant needs to think about.
Cool. Okay. Well, so what we'll do is I'll wrap it up. Is there? I do have a couple of questions I mentioned to you beforehand. I want to ask you the regular podcast interview questions, because I want to put this out as a regular episode with your permission. So,
absolutely.
What is the number one tip you'd give somebody who wants to build their authority?
Take a stand. Take a point of view. Don't go with what everyone else is saying. Don't try to be middle of the road. There really is no room to be the same voice that everyone else is being. It just doesn't work. And so figure out who your personality is, what is the angle that you're selling, what's your value proposition, and what is the unique way through the lens of your personality that you can package that to sell it and make people want to gravitate toward it.
Love it, love it. Is there a business mistake or failure that you've experienced that you can tell us about and what you learned from it?
Oh, gosh. Yeah. How much time do you have? Look, I would say probably one of the biggest ones is before as I was trying to transition through business models in the aftermath of the COVID outbreak, one of the models that I tried was doing a solo consultancy based in New Zealand, where I was at the time. And I just didn't do enough. I was so focused on trying to sell value that I didn't do my homework on the business culture. And is this a place where I can sell consulting? Is this a place where people are interested in innovations and improvements? And if I had just really taken a month and done that homework, I could have saved myself a year of pain.
Wow. Okay. Okay. And so what did that change for your next project? How did you approach it differently?
Absolutely. So for my current venture, for Propel Revenue, I took a lot of time actually making contacts on LinkedIn, talking to people in the cargo space, using my network to say, not to say, here, let me sell you something, but just, hey, look, I'm researching this. I want to make sure that my perception of the industry and the state of the industry is correct. And in some cases I was right, and in some cases I was wrong. But it definitely gave me enough confidence to go forward and say, hey, this is a business model that's going to work. Cool.
Is there a business book or resource that's been important for you or that you'd recommend?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, many. So we've talked about Alan Weiss. The $1 Million Consulting Series is priceless. Lots of great ideas, lots of great frameworks, especially if you're just getting started. And he actually has a book called Getting Started in Consulting that I would highly recommend. In terms of, well, if we're talking about authority, one that someone that you and I both respect is Rochelle Moulton, and she just wrote a book last year called The Authority Code, which I think is brilliant, and it lays out a great framework. In fact, I think it's a really good starting point for anybody who's going to be a client of yours to start that with that book, and then use you to kind of define down exactly what the tentacles of the strategy are going to be. But she provides a really nice high-level framework. But the biggest thing I would recommend is read books from earlier in history. Read books from World War II. Read books from the 1600s. There is so much. History repeats itself, and humanity keeps making the same mistakes over and over. And the more, even as business people, the more we understand about history, the more we understand about humanity, the better we can serve our fellow humans. Perry Marshall, who's another marketing guru that we both respect, and we've talked about before, has what he calls Renaissance time, and he recommends that everyone spend 20 minutes a day reading something that was written from before the printing press, from before Gutenberg. And I think that is priceless advice, because even in the first half of this millennium, there really was, the previous millennium, there were things happening that we're seeing repeated now, just in slightly different frames, slightly different terms. And so I think having a solid knowledge of history makes you a better business person.
Really, really interesting. Yeah, I love that. And by the way, I had Rochelle on. She's the only repeat guest so far. And I had her on to talk about the Authority Code, so you can find that episode if you go back. I think, is it episode 50? No, I can't find that. We'll have to cut that out.
It was. I remember the episode, and it was great.
Yeah. Episode 9 and episode 38. There we go. So episode 38 is where she talks about the building authority and the Authority Code. So, okay. So last question is about fiction. Do you read fiction? Is there anything that you love and recommend?
I do. I actually, I'm reading something it's both fictional, but it's also kind of tied to my niche. It's a book called The Shipping Man. The author is a fellow called Matthew McCleary. And it's about a New York City hedge fund manager who, when he watched the shipping price index crater this was said about a decade ago, by 97%. He actually went out and bought cargo ships on the cheap and decided to become a cargo magnate himself. And it's the greatest trial by fire and trial by error story that you really could imagine. And yeah, that's called The Shipping Man. I love that. And then another one that I just finished recently is called The Enemies of My Country, and that's more of a military fiction, intelligence fiction piece, and that's about a special forces operative whose family members come under attack, and that's something I've really been enjoying lately.
Okay, cool. And we'll put links to all of those in the show notes. So, Judson, where can people find you if they want to learn more?
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn at Judson Rollins, JUDSONROLLINS, or you can find me at propelrev.com, PROPELREV.com. And yeah, if you're in the shipping space, even if you're not looking to be a potential client, please feel free to reach out. I'd love to just meet you and have a chat.
Hey, if you're interested in working with me directly and having me help out with your business, I'd be delighted to talk. So if you check under wherever you found this video, you'll probably find a link. And you can also find it if you go to therecognizedauthority.com. You'll find a link on there to work with me as a coach. It's just called coaching. So I hope to work with you if you're interested. And if you got something from this video, I really hope that you got some insight, something that helped you with your business. And I'd be delighted to talk to you and figure out if I'm a good fit to work with you. So check out therecognizedauthority.com and see you in the next video.